I want you to look at my hands right now. These hands once wore rings worth more than most people's houses. Diamond-cut gold, emerald stones the size of thumbnails, mined from places most people will never visit. These hands signed documents I didn't understand, in rooms I wasn't allowed to leave, for a life I never chose. And these same hands, these exact hands, once held a book that nearly got me killed. Not a weapon, not a bomb, a Bible. A small, worn, underlined Bible, hidden beneath the silk-sheeted mattress of a palace bedroom the size of a football pitch. And the night my brother found it, the night he carried it down that 200-meter hallway and placed it on my father's desk like a piece of evidence at an execution. That was the night I learned what it meant to be truly, completely, utterly powerless. But let me take you back to the palace where this nightmare began. Because before you can understand what I lost, you need to understand what I had. I grew up inside walls that most people only see in movies, and even the movies get it wrong. Our palace in Riyadh sat on 40 acres of private land. 40 acres. Surrounded by walls so high you couldn't see the sky from the inner courtyard unless you tilted your head all the way back. The Majlis, our formal reception hall, had ceilings that soared 30 feet above Italian marble floors so polished, so blindingly white, that I used to walk across them slowly just to watch my own reflection drift beneath my feet. A ghost of a girl in gold, drowning and not knowing it. The chandeliers alone, each one, cost more than a private jet. My mother told me that once, casually, the way someone else's mother might mention the price of groceries. Crystal from Austria, custom fitted. Each bulb changed by a team of 6 men who arrived twice a year in white uniforms, as if the chandeliers themselves deserved a medical staff. The palace smelled of oud and damask rose, that heavy, amber-thick perfume that clings to silk and stone and never quite leaves. Every morning, servants would walk the hallways carrying bakur burners, small, ornate censers of smouldering incense, filling each corridor with smoke that rose like prayers. Beautiful, suffocating, both at the same time. I had 47 abayas. I counted them once, standing in my walk-in wardrobe the size of a studio apartment. 47. Some embroidered with 24-carat gold thread by craftswomen in Paris. Some imported from Milan, custom designed with my name stitched in Arabic calligraphy on the inner lining. A name that meant princess, a name that felt, more and more, like a sentence. 47 abayas. 0 choices about what my life would become. If you've never known wealth, real wealth, the kind that has its own zip code and its own armed security detail, let me tell you something nobody tells you. Money is the most beautiful prison ever built. The bars are gold, the walls are marble. The warden smiles and calls you Habibti, my beloved. And you don't even realize you're an inmate until the day you try to walk out the front gate, and 4 guards step in front of you without a word. I was 17 the first time I tried to leave without permission. I was brought back within the hour. Nobody raised their voice. That was the terrifying part. Nobody ever raised their voice in our palace. My father didn't need to shout. He ruled 200 people inside those walls. Staff, guards, advisors, family members, private imams, with nothing louder than a whisper that landed like a verdict. I ate from gold plates at dinner, literal gold plates. Michelin star food, prepared by chefs flown in from Geneva and Tokyo. Lobster, wagyu, saffron-infused rice that cost more per kilo than most monthly salaries. And I remember sitting at that table one night, surrounded by family, surrounded by the most beautiful food I'd ever seen, and feeling nothing but a hollow, howling emptiness so loud inside my chest that I was convinced everyone at the table could hear it. They couldn't. They were too busy being seen. I had everything they told me a woman in my position could want. Title, wealth, security, privilege beyond imagination. What I didn't have was a name for the hunger that lived inside me. That deep, persistent ache that no amount of beauty or luxury or designer silk could touch. I didn't have a name for it then. I do now. It was my soul, screaming. Maybe you're watching this thinking, she had everything. Why wasn't she grateful? Maybe you think I should have been satisfied. Maybe you've never sat in a $250,000 room and cried until you couldn't breathe because you felt more alone than an orphan in an empty field. Maybe you've never been grateful for a cage because at least the cage is familiar. The night I found that book, that small, contraband, life-altering book, everything changed. I didn't know yet that finding it would cost me everything. I didn't know yet that it would also save me. Let me tell you about my father. Not the version the newspapers printed, the diplomatic statesman, the generous patron of Islamic scholarship, the noble servant of the two holy mosques. Not the man photographed shaking hands with world leaders in Geneva conference rooms, his thobe perfectly pressed, his smile perfectly calibrated for Western cameras. I mean the real man. My father. I will call him by the name his inner circle used in private, the name that made junior advisors flinch, Prince Mansour. Second son of the previous governor, a man who had waited his entire life for power and, having finally tasted it, was incapable of sharing even the smallest crumb of it with anyone, including his own daughter. He was not a large man physically, medium height, trim. Always impeccably dressed in the finest white thobe, a mishla of deep burgundy wool draped over his shoulders like a king's robe, the edges embroidered in threads that caught light like tiny flames. He wore one ring, just one, a single black onyx stone set in thick yellow gold on his right hand. Heavy, ancient-looking. He twisted it when he was thinking. Round and round and round on his finger, slow and deliberate, like a dial being turned on something dangerous. I learned as a child to watch that ring. When it stopped moving, when his hand went still, that was when you needed to be afraid. He kept a curved dagger on the edge of his desk, handcrafted, silver handle inlaid with turquoise stones. He never touched it during meetings. He never needed to. It simply sat there, positioned at a precise angle, close enough to notice, far enough to seem incidental. I once asked my older brother Faisal what the dagger was for. He looked at me for a long moment and said, very quietly, "Baba keeps it as a reminder, not for others, for himself. A reminder of what loyalty costs." I didn't understand that then. I understand it now. My father had 4 wives and 11 children. I was the third daughter of his second wife, which meant I occupied a very specific, very understood position in the family architecture. Visible enough to be presented at formal gatherings, invisible enough that my personal preferences were considered largely irrelevant to the larger project of the family's legacy. That project had a very specific plan for me. I found out on a Tuesday. I remember the day with a precision that still frightens me. The way trauma burns certain moments into your memory like a brand. The light in the east wing that afternoon was golden and thick, pouring through latticed windows and falling across the Majlis floor in long amber rectangles. I remember the smell, oud and cardamom coffee, the tiny porcelain cups arranged on a silver tray by a servant who had disappeared with the practiced silence of someone who knew bad news was coming and wanted no part of it. My father was already seated when I entered. That was unusual. He always made people wait. The fact that he was already there, already still, that ring already motionless on his finger. My stomach dropped before a single word was spoken. Sit, Ameerah. Not Habibti, not my daughter, just my name. Flat, final. I sat. He lifted the small coffee cup, not the one in front of me, I noticed he didn't offer mine, and took one slow sip, set it down, aligned it precisely with the edge of the tray. You are to be married. The arrangements are complete. Prince Walid bin Nasser has asked for you, and I have accepted on behalf of the family. The room tilted. Prince Walid bin Nasser. I knew that name. Wallahi, I knew that name. Every girl in our circle knew that name. Whispered it the way you whisper about something you hope never comes near you. He was 63 years old, a cousin of a cousin, twice removed from any meaningful royal lineage, but wealthy enough and connected enough that his requests carried weight. He had been married 4 times. 3 of those wives had, as the family said, been returned. The 4th had not been seen publicly in 6 years. He was 63. I was 19. Baba. My voice came out as something barely above air. Please, The ceremony is in 40 days. He stood. Discussion over. Your mother will coordinate the trousseau. You will be gracious and you will be grateful. This match honors the family. It will kill me. I don't know where the words came from. They arrived before I could stop them. He stopped walking. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. I counted them, like a condemned person counts last breaths. He turned, and for just a moment, just one fraction of a second, I saw something cross his face that wasn't authority or coldness. It was something older, smaller, something that looked almost like pain, like a man who had once, long ago, been a boy who understood what it meant to be powerless, and had spent every decade since making absolutely sure he would never feel it again. The moment passed like smoke. You will not speak to me again until you are ready to speak with gratitude. He adjusted the onyx ring. Once, slowly. 40 days, Ameerah. He walked out. I sat in that golden room, in that amber light, surrounded by untouched coffee and a silence so total it had texture. And my knees, even though I was sitting, gave out beneath me. My whole body folded inward like paper. The room spun. The marble floor, that beautiful, merciless, polished mirror floor, seemed to rise up toward me. I couldn't breathe. I genuinely could not draw air into my lungs. 40 days. 40 days until my life, whatever small, caged version of it I had, was handed to a man I feared before I'd ever been in the same room with him. I pressed my hands flat against that cold marble floor, and I tried to remember who I was. I couldn't. Because the truth was, and this is the part that broke me most completely, I had never been allowed to find out. That was the night I learned what powerlessness really meant. Not the decorative powerlessness of a girl who doesn't get to choose her dress, the absolute, bone-deep, suffocating powerlessness of a human being who has been, her entire life, someone else's property. Dressed in gold, treated like a possession. And somewhere, in the deepest, most secret room of my heart, a door I didn't even know existed yet had begun, very slowly, to creak open. I didn't know what was behind it. Not yet. I want to tell you something that might surprise you. I was not a bad Muslim. I know that's what some people assume, that a person who eventually leaves Islam must have been half-hearted about it to begin with. Lukewarm, uncommitted, looking for an excuse. No, I was devoted, genuinely, sincerely, with everything I had, devoted. I prayed all 5, every single day. Fajr before dawn, when the palace was still dark and the marble floors were cold enough to feel through my prayer socks. Dhuhr at midday. Asr in the afternoon light. Maghrib at sunset. Isha before sleep. 5 times a day, every day without fail. Not because guards were watching, not because my father demanded it, but because I wanted God. I wanted him desperately. I needed him the way a drowning person needs the surface. I memorized entire surahs. My Quran recitation was considered beautiful. My private Islamic tutor, Sheikh Hamdan, an elderly man with a white beard and kind eyes, who smelled permanently of musk and rosewater, told me once that my recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha moved him to tears. I held on to that compliment for years. It was one of the few times anyone in that palace told me I had done something beautifully rather than correctly. I performed wudu, the ritual purification before prayer, washing hands, face, arms, feet, in precise sequence, with care that went beyond obligation. I believed in what I was doing, or I believed in wanting to believe, which for a long time felt close enough. I fasted every Ramadan, all 30 days, even as a child, even when I was sick. I gave sadaqah, voluntary charity, from my personal allowance, secretly, through channels my father didn't know about, because something in me needed to give something away, in a life where everything was only ever given to me as a form of control. I did everything right, and God was silent. After the announcement, after my father's 40-day decree landed on my life like a stone wall dropping from the sky, I threw myself into prayer with an intensity that frightened even me. Every morning at Fajr, I would walk through the inner courtyard to our private mosque. The palace mosque was extraordinary, even by the standards of a place where everything was extraordinary. Hand-painted geometric tiles from Persia covered the walls in patterns so intricate they seemed to breathe. The carpet, deep green with gold borders, had been commissioned from craftsmen in Isfahan and took 3 years to complete. The mihrab, the arched niche indicating the direction of Mecca, was inlaid with mother-of-pearl and lapis lazuli. It was, genuinely, one of the most beautiful rooms I had ever stood in, and it felt completely, utterly, cosmically empty. I would press my forehead to that carpet, that $3 million carpet, and I would whisper into it with everything I had. Allah, please, see me. I am here. I am yours. Please, just let me know you are listening. Please. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Not the silence of a presence so vast it transcends sound. I want to be honest with you, because this testimony only means something if I am ruthlessly honest. It was the silence of an empty room, the silence of a phone call when no one picks up, the silence that, the longer it stretches, begins to feel like an answer in itself. I tried harder. I read tafsir, Quranic commentary, for hours. I asked Sheikh Hamdan careful, circling questions about whether God heard individual prayers or only collective ones, about whether personal suffering had divine meaning, about whether a woman in my position had any recourse within Islamic law against a marriage she didn't want. His answers were gentle and immovable as stone walls. Submission is the path to peace, Your Highness. The will of your father is, in this matter, aligned with the will of Allah. Trust, Habibti. Trust and patience. These are the highest virtues. I trusted. I was patient. I prayed until the skin on my forehead was raw from the carpet. Nothing changed. The 40 days kept counting down. Prince Walid's formal gifts began arriving. Jewellery sent ahead as a preview of ownership, delivered in velvet boxes by stone-faced emissaries who wouldn't meet my eyes. Gold. More gold. A diamond necklace I couldn't look at without feeling sick. And Allah, the God I had devoted 19 years of faithful, sincere, desperate devotion to, felt further away than the moon. Further away than the stars beyond the moon. I need you to understand something before I go further. Because I know some of you watching, maybe a lot of you, are Muslim. And I am not here to mock what you believe. I am not here to perform for an audience or score points for any team. I am here to tell you the truth of what happened to me. And the truth is this. I prayed in the most exquisite mosque in the kingdom. I prayed on carpets worth millions, beneath chandeliers worth more. I prayed in Arabic, perfect Arabic, words I had memorized so deeply they lived in my bones. I prayed with clean hands, clean heart, clean intention. And I heard nothing. Not because God doesn't exist. I know that now. I know it with every cell in my body. But because the God I was searching for, the God I had been taught, was a God of distance, a God of law and compliance and submission, a God who demanded everything and offered, in return, the cold comfort of correct procedure. I didn't know yet that there was another kind of God, a God who searches for you, while you are still searching for Him. A God who doesn't wait for you to be clean enough, quiet enough, correct enough. A God who comes to you, into your palace, into your locked room, into your worst night, and calls you by your name. I didn't know that yet, but something in me had begun to break open. The loneliness of those weeks is something I struggle to describe even now, years later, with distance and healing between me and that girl on the carpet. I was surrounded by 200 people inside those palace walls. Staff who had served our family for decades. Sisters who slept in rooms 50 meters from mine. A mother who arranged my trousseau with the efficient grace of someone completing a business transaction rather than preparing her daughter for the rest of her life. I remember standing at the window of my chambers one evening, watching the sun go down over the desert, that enormous, indifferent desert that stretched out beyond the palace walls in every direction, like a sea that offered no rescue, and realizing with a clarity that was almost peaceful in its completeness, no one is coming. Not Allah, not my mother, not my sisters, not the sheikh with his gentle eyes and immovable answers. No one was coming. The desert light turned everything amber, the same colour as the majlis that afternoon, when my father had ended my life with a sentence and walked away adjusting his ring. I pressed my hand flat against the cold glass. I was 19 years old. I had everything, and I had never, in my entire life, in all my years of gold and privilege and marble and silk, I had never felt so completely, so profoundly, so absolutely alone. It started with a box. Not a dramatic discovery, not a cinematic moment of fate with swelling music and perfect lighting. Just a box, cardboard, unremarkable, sitting in the corner of my mother's secondary sitting room, the private one, not the formal reception room she used for guests, but the smaller, personal space where she kept things she considered too intimate for servants to handle. She had asked me, 3 weeks after the announcement, with the wedding now 17 days away, to retrieve a specific set of documents from that room. Property records, I think. Something administrative. Something that underscored, even in that errand, that my impending marriage was fundamentally a transaction. I found the documents. I was leaving, and then I saw the corner of the box, half hidden behind a low cabinet, and I saw something that made me stop mid-step. A cross, small, wooden, worn smooth from handling, barely 3 inches tall, tied with a faded red thread to the cardboard flap of the box, as if someone had attached it as an identifier, as a label. I stood there for a long time. In our world, in the world of Wahhabist Saudi royal culture, where even the suggestion of another faith was treated as contamination, where the mutaween, the religious police, maintained moral enforcement even within elite private circles, where a cross in a palace was not merely forbidden but incomprehensible. That small wooden cross was as shocking as a live grenade sitting on the carpet. My hands were shaking when I picked it up. I don't know how long I stood there holding it before I heard a sound in the hallway and dropped it back into the box like it had burned me. I took the documents. I left. I told no one. But for 3 days, 3 days of wedding preparations, trousseau fittings, formal family gatherings where I smiled with a face that had learned to perform calm the way an actor performs it, mechanical and hollow. For 3 days, all I could think about was that box. It was Maryam who told me. Maryam was my mother's oldest personal servant. She had been with our family since before I was born. A small, quiet Filipino woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that always seemed to be carrying something heavy and private. She had dressed me as a child. She had braided my hair for Eid celebrations. She had, once, when I was 7 years old and had fallen from a horse and was too frightened to cry in front of my father, held my hand in the medical wing and whispered prayers over me in a language I didn't recognize. I know now what language that was. I found her alone in the linen corridor 2 days after I'd seen the box, and something, I cannot explain it more precisely than this, only that it felt like being pushed from the inside, gently but insistently. Something made me stop her. Maryam. I kept my voice low, even though the corridor was empty. Old habit. In a palace, you learned that empty corridors had memories. The box, in my mother's sitting room, the one with the... I couldn't say it out loud. I made the shape with my fingers instead. She went very still. For a moment, her eyes searched mine with an intensity that was completely at odds with 30 years of trained servitude. She was reading me, looking for something specific. Whatever she found, it was apparently enough. She glanced once down each end of the corridor. Then she reached into the deep pocket of her uniform and pressed something into my hand. Flat, thin, wrapped in a plain cotton cloth. "I have been praying for you for 19 years, Your Highness," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "Since the day you were born. I ask God, every day, to bring this to you at the right time." Then she walked away. I stood in that corridor, holding the cloth-wrapped object, and my heart was beating so loudly I was certain it was audible. I waited until my chambers were empty, until the evening servants had turned down my bed and laid out my night things and filed quietly out of the room with their usual invisible efficiency. I waited until I heard the last set of footsteps fade down the far hallway. Then I locked my door, both locks, the main one and the secondary bolt that I had never used before, had barely known was there. I checked the corners of the room, slowly, methodically, for cameras. We had security cameras in public areas of the palace. I had never been certain about the private chambers. I checked every corner, every angle. Then I sat on the floor, not on the bed, and the floor, pressed into the corner furthest from the door, and I unwrapped the cloth. It was small, smaller than I expected. A pocket New Testament, the kind distributed by missionaries. I know that now, though I didn't know it then. The cover was dark blue, worn at the corners. Inside the front cover, in handwriting I didn't recognize, someone had written in English, "He sees you. He loves you. He is coming for you." I read those 3 sentences 4 times. He sees you. In 19 years of prayer and submission and perfect religious performance, no one had ever suggested to me that God saw me, specifically, individually. Me, not the princess, not the family representative, not the vessel for someone else's legacy. Me. My throat tightened. I didn't know enough English then to read it fluently. I had learned formal English for diplomatic functions, textbook and stiff. So I read slowly, carefully, cross-referencing words I didn't know with a translation app on a secondary phone that I had, weeks earlier, begun hiding inside a hollowed-out decorative book on my shelf. The irony of hiding a phone inside a book, and now hiding a book itself, it wasn't lost on me even then. Every night for the next 2 weeks, after servants left, after the palace quieted, after the call to Isha prayer had echoed through the corridors and faded, I would perform the same ritual. Lock both doors, check the corners, retrieve the New Testament from beneath my mattress, where it lived during daylight hours, inside a cut-open seam that I had carefully, with nail scissors, opened and re-stitched with thread from my sewing kit. Sit in my corner, read by the thin beam of a small torch I kept palmed in my hand, ready to extinguish in an instant. I read like someone starving. No, I read like someone who had been starving for so long they had stopped recognizing the feeling as hunger, and had suddenly, unexpectedly, been handed bread. I want to tell you about the verses that broke me, because certain words, when you encounter them for the first time in the right moment, they don't just inform you, they detonate inside you. They rearrange things. They move walls you didn't know were load-bearing. The first one that stopped my breath was John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. I read it 3 times. Then I sat back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. Whosoever. Not whosoever performs the correct ablutions. Not whosoever submits with perfect compliance. Not whosoever is born into the right family, or recites the right words, in the right language, in the right direction. Whosoever believes, that word, that single, enormous, scandalously inclusive word, sat in the middle of my chest like a warm stone. Then Ephesians 2:8-9. For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. I had to put the book down. I pressed both hands over my mouth, and I sat there in the dark, on the floor of a palace bedroom worth more money than most countries will ever see. And I felt something crack open inside me that I didn't have words for yet. My entire life had been structured around works, around performance, around earning. Earning my place in the family, earning my father's approval, earning divine acceptance through correct ritual and perfect submission. The implicit theology of everything I had ever been taught was, earn it, prove it, deserve it. And here was this ancient book, this contraband, dangerous, palace-forbidden book, telling me that God's love was not a wage, it was a gift. You don't earn a gift. You can't. The moment you earn it, it stops being a gift. It becomes a transaction. I had been in transactions my entire life. The idea of a gift, unearned, unconditional, extended to whosoever, was so foreign to everything I had ever experienced that it felt, in the most paradoxical way, like the most radical thing I had ever read. My entire worldview, the architecture of 19 years of belief and performance and submission, began quietly in that corner, in that dark, in that palace, to come apart at its foundations. My entire life I had been taught that Jesus was a prophet, a good man, a messenger, respected but finite, human and distant. But this book, his book, said something else entirely. It said he was God. It said he came here, into this, into the mess and the pain and the marble floors and the gold plates and the arranged marriages and the locked rooms and the unanswered prayers. It said he came for me. 7 days before the wedding, my brother found the Bible, not the New Testament, Maryam's gift, still safe in its hidden seam. Something else, something I had been careless about. A single printed page. John 3:16, the verse that had first cracked me open, that I had copied by hand onto paper in the early hours of one sleepless morning, because I needed to hold the words in my own handwriting, needed to feel them travel from the page through my fingers and into my body in a new way. I had hidden it inside a poetry book on my shelf. Arabic poetry, Khalil Gibran, the kind of literary possession that required no explanation in an educated household. My brother Faisal found it during what I can only describe as a search. I didn't know the search was happening until it was over. I came back from my mother's rooms that afternoon to find my chambers subtly, professionally altered. The kind of alteration that is designed to be invisible. Things replaced almost exactly where they were, almost exactly how they were. But I knew my room. I knew the precise angle of every object on every surface, the way a prisoner knows their cell. The poetry book was 2 centimeters further left than I had left it. My blood went cold. I checked the seam in the mattress immediately. The New Testament was still there, undisturbed, undetected. But the page, the handwritten page, was gone. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought with a clarity that felt almost supernatural in itself. This is it. This is the moment. I had perhaps hours. I spent them in prayer. Not desperate, clawing, unanswered prayer. The kind I had known for 19 years. Something different. Something that felt for the first time in my life like an actual conversation. Like two-way communication. I told Jesus everything I was afraid of. I told him I wasn't brave enough for what was coming. I told him I didn't know how to do this. And in the quiet of that room, in the way that I had come to recognize as his particular voice, not audible, but more real than audible, landing in a place deeper than ears, I felt rather than heard. I will be in that room with you. You will not speak alone. They came for me at 8 o'clock the following morning. 2 household guards. Formal, eyes forward. Not the casual staff members I had known since childhood. These were senior security. My father's personal detail. The message of that distinction was unmistakable. Your Highness, your father requests your presence in the Diwan. The Diwan. Not the family majlis. Not the informal sitting room. The Diwan. My father's formal reception chamber. The room where official business was conducted, where decisions were announced rather than discussed. The room with the desk. The room with the dagger. I dressed carefully. I chose a plain black abaya. No embroidery, no gold thread. I wanted no ornamentation. I wanted to walk into that room as myself, undecorated, with nothing between my skin and whatever was about to happen. I walked the 200-meter hallway. I counted the steps the way I always had. 154 from the east wing staircase to the Diwan door. But this time, something was different about the counting. Each step felt not like a countdown to a verdict, but like a deliberate, chosen movement forward. Like I was walking towards something rather than being marched to it. 154 steps. I pushed the door open myself before the guards could do it for me. A small thing. The first small sovereignty I had exercised in as long as I could remember. The room was full. That was the first thing I registered. More people than I had expected. My father, standing behind his desk rather than sitting, which I had never seen before. His standing meant this was beyond a conversation. It was a proceeding. Faisal, my brother, seated to the right, his expression carefully neutral in the way of someone managing guilt. Two of my father's senior advisors, older men, robed, bearded, faces I associated with formal family decisions. Sheikh Hamdan, my religious tutor, seated apart from the others, his kind eyes now carrying something that looked distressingly like pity. And at the edge of the room, almost against the wall, Maryam. She was standing very still. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her face was composed, but her eyes, when they found mine across the room, said everything. They said, "I am sorry. I am praying. I am here." I looked at her and tried to put everything I felt into a single look back. You saved my life. Whatever happens now, you saved my life. My father waited until I had reached the center of the room before he spoke. Ameerah. That whisper, that particular, soft, absolute whisper that had made rooms hold their breath my entire life. Sit. I sat. He reached into the drawer of his desk, slowly, without breaking eye contact with me, and withdrew the page. My handwritten page. John 3:16 in my own handwriting, Arabic transliteration alongside the English, unmistakably mine. He placed it on the desk facing me, smoothed it flat with one hand. The onyx ring caught the morning light. Explain this. Not a question. A test. A final examination with only one acceptable answer. The room was absolutely silent. I could hear the distant courtyard fountain. I could hear my own heartbeat, and then I felt it. The same warmth I had felt in my bedroom that night. The same presence. Quieter now, less visible, but there. Unmistakably, solidly there. Like a hand placed on your shoulder from behind. You can't see it, but you feel the weight of it, the steadiness of it, the message of it. I am here. Speak. I lifted my eyes from the page to my father's face. Baba. I kept my voice steady. It surprised me how steady it was. This is John 3:16. It is a verse from the Gospel of Jesus Christ. I wrote it because I have been reading the Christian scriptures, and they have changed my life. Because I had an encounter with Jesus, a real encounter, not a dream, not imagination. And he is who the Gospel says he is. He is the Son of God. He is my Lord. The silence after those words was the loudest thing I have ever heard. My father did not move. Not one muscle. He stood behind his desk like a statue of everything his life had been built to protect. And I watched something travel across his face. Rage, disbelief, and beneath both of those things, moving too fast to catch properly, that same flash of something broken and human that I had seen in the majlis the day he announced my marriage. A father, somewhere beneath all the armour, a father who had not expected this and did not know what to do with it. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then his face closed like a vault. You will renounce this. Still the whisper, somehow worse for it. You will renounce this now, in front of these witnesses. You will perform tawbah, repentance, before Sheikh Hamdan. You will never speak of this again, and the wedding will proceed on schedule. This conversation will not have happened. He paused. Or. The word landed in the room, like a stone dropped into still water. Everyone felt the ripple. or you are no longer my daughter. You are no longer of this family. You will be removed from the succession. Every rial of your inheritance, every property, every account, every asset held in your name will be dissolved. You will leave this palace with nothing. You will be dead to this family, and I will not be able to guarantee your safety beyond these walls. He let that settle. Then, so quietly that only I could hear it, he added, "For the last time, Ameerah, renounce this Jesus, or renounce your life." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because it matters. I did not feel brave. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I did not feel brave. Bravery, I think, is what you feel when you are not afraid. What I felt was terror. Complete, physical, nauseating terror. My hands were shaking in my lap beneath the table, where no one could see them. My mouth was dry. The room felt like it was tilting. But underneath the terror, underneath it, deeper than it, more foundational than it, there was something that the terror could not touch, could not reach, could not move. A certainty. Not the certainty of argument or theology or intellectual conclusion. The certainty of someone who has been in a room with Jesus Christ and watched him kneel to where they were and heard him say their name. You cannot unknow that. No threat on earth, no father, no dagger, no royal decree, no forfeited inheritance can make you unknow it. I looked at my father, the king, the authority, the man who had defined the architecture of my entire existence, and I felt, in the most paradoxical and overwhelming way, something I had genuinely never felt toward him before. Compassion. Because I could see, in that moment, what he could not see about himself. That he was as trapped as I had ever been. More trapped, perhaps. Trapped by a system he had not built, but had inherited and maintained and weaponized because it was the only world he knew. Trapped by the performance of absolute authority, which meant he could never, not once, show uncertainty or tenderness or the humanity I had glimpsed twice now behind the vault of his face. Trapped by a religion that had given him power over everyone around him and peace with no one, including himself. I felt compassion for my father, and then I opened my mouth. "Baba." My voice came out differently than I expected. Not defiant, not theatrical. Quiet and clear and completely, unmistakably certain. The voice of someone speaking from a place that fear cannot access. I love you. I have always loved you. And I am telling you the truth right now, because you deserve the truth from your daughter, even if you don't want it. I stood up. I renounce the lies I was raised with. I renounce the performance of a faith I never felt, and a submission I never chose. Jesus Christ is Lord. He is the Son of God. He came into my locked room, and he called me by my name, and he is worth infinitely more than this palace, this title, this inheritance, this family's approval, and every kingdom built by human hands. I looked directly into my father's eyes. I am his, and there is nothing in this world that has the power to change that. The silence was total, and then the miracle. Not the miracle I would have written if I were fabricating this story. Not a pillar of fire, or a booming voice from heaven, or a dramatic, cinematic, supernatural explosion. Something quieter, something that, because of its quietness, was, I believe, more devastating to everyone in that room. Sheikh Hamdan began to weep. This man, this elderly, gentle scholar who had tutored me in Quranic recitation since I was 6 years old, who had given my father the religious cover for every decision made in this room for 30 years, who was present specifically to provide the theological authorization for my punishment. This man covered his face with both hands and wept. Not quietly, audibly, his shoulders shaking beneath his thobe. Everyone in the room stared at him. My father stared at him. Sheikh. The old man lowered his hands. His face was wet. His eyes, when they found my father's, held something I had never seen in them during all my years of tutoring. Not pity, not judgment. Something that looked, I can only describe it this way, like recognition. Like a man who had, in the last 60 seconds, been confronted with something he had spent a lifetime successfully avoiding. Your Highness, he said to my father. His voice was different, stripped of its usual formal authority, raw. I cannot do this. My father's face, I watched it. A muscle in his jaw moved. The onyx ring began its slow rotation on his finger. Hamdan, I cannot. The sheikh stood, slowly, with the effort of an old man, but with a dignity that seemed in that moment larger than the room. I have served this family for 40 years. I will serve it 40 more. But I cannot stand in this room and authorize what you are asking me to authorize. He looked at me. This girl is speaking with a conviction I have not heard in 40 years of religious scholarship. I do not know what she encountered, but I know. He stopped, seemed to make a decision. I know it was real. He walked out of the room. The 2 senior advisors exchanged a glance. One of them stood, made a formal excuse about another engagement, left. Then the second. My father stood behind his desk, and for the first time in my entire life, he looked like what he actually was beneath everything. A man. Just a man. Aging, uncertain, standing in a room that had just emptied around him in a way he had not calculated and could not control. He looked at me for a long time. I held his gaze. He picked up the page from the desk, my handwritten page, John 3:16, in my own handwriting. He looked at it. Something moved through his face that I will not describe because it was private. It belonged to him, whatever it was, and it was the most human I had ever seen him. He set it back down. He walked out of the room without another word. He did not look back. Faisal, my brother, who had found the page, who had carried it to our father, who had sat throughout this entire proceeding with his face carefully neutral, sat alone now in the emptying room. He stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were red. He said nothing. He simply shook his head, slowly, once, in a way that might have meant I'm sorry, or might have meant I don't understand, or might have meant both simultaneously, which is perhaps the most honest response to an encounter with something true that you are not yet ready for. Then he too left. I stood alone in my father's divan. The morning light came through the high arched windows in long golden columns, falling across the marble floor, illuminating the dust motes drifting in the air like tiny suspended stars. I looked at the desk, at the dagger angled precisely on its surface, at the empty chairs, at the door through which everyone had gone. And I looked at the page, still lying where my father had left it, his handprint still faintly visible on it from where he had smoothed it flat. John 3:16. For God so loved the world. I picked it up. I folded it carefully. I put it in the pocket of my plain black abaya against my heart. And I understood with the quiet, settled certainty of someone who has just watched the Red Sea part in a Riyadh palace on a Tuesday morning, that what had just happened in this room was not my doing, not my courage, not my eloquence, not my strength. His. All of it. His. Hallelujah! Nobody tells you about the waiting. Every escape story you have ever heard, every film, every testimony, every breathless account of someone fleeing danger, they all compress the waiting into nothing. They cut from the dramatic moment of decision to the running, the fleeing, the crossing of borders. They skip the part in between because the part in between is not cinematic. But the part in between almost broke me more than anything that came before it. After my father walked out of the Diwan, after the room emptied, after Maryam took my hands and said that one word, nothing happened immediately. No guards came. No decree was issued that afternoon. No one came to my chambers that evening with an official pronouncement. The palace simply continued. Dinner was served at the usual time. The fountains ran in the courtyard. The evening adhan echoed through the corridors. Staff moved through their routines with the practiced invisibility of people who had learned, across decades of palace service, that the safest response to tension between their employers was to see nothing, hear nothing, and keep the household functioning regardless. I sat in my chambers that night, the New Testament against my chest, my door locked, my body completely still, and I waited to find out what my father had decided to do with me. The waiting lasted 3 days. 3 days in which I barely slept. 3 days in which every set of footsteps in the corridor outside my room caused my heart to seize. 3 days in which I ate the meals brought to me mechanically, tasting nothing, because my entire nervous system was locked in a permanent state of alert that food could not penetrate. I prayed continuously. Not formal prayer, conversation. The kind I had learned in that room on that night, talking to Jesus the way you talk to someone sitting across from you, someone who is actually listening, actually present, actually concerned with the specific granular details of your specific granular fear. I don't know what's coming. I don't know what he's decided. I don't know if I'm going to be here tomorrow. And that presence, that warmth, quieter now than it had been in the room, but steady, constant, unmistakably real, would answer in the wordless way I had come to recognize. I know. I'm here. Keep breathing. On the morning of the 3rd day, Maryam came. She didn't knock the way she usually knocked. 3 light taps, her standard signal. She knocked twice, paused, then once more. A code I hadn't known we had until she used it, and somehow I understood it immediately. This is different. Pay attention. I opened the door. Her face told me everything before she spoke. Not panic. Maryam did not panic. I had never seen her panic in all the years I'd known her. But a focused, quiet urgency that was more alarming than panic would have been. The urgency of someone who has been planning carefully and has just received the signal that the plan must now be executed. "Tonight," she said. Just that word. Then she glanced down the corridor, left, right, the practiced surveillance of someone who had lived their entire life in a house where walls listened, and slipped inside my room. She closed the door behind her and spoke quickly, quietly, in the efficient cadence of someone reciting a plan they had rehearsed. My father had not yet signed a formal decree, which meant there was a window, small, narrowing, but present. His inaction over 3 days was not mercy, she was clear about that. It was calculation. He was managing the optics, consulting with advisors, weighing the diplomatic and social cost of various responses. The window would close. She didn't know exactly when, but her contact, and she paused very briefly on the word contact, and I understood from that pause that she was protecting someone by not naming them. Her contact had told her, "Tonight or never." "Where?" I asked. She named an embassy. I will not name it here, not because it is a secret now, but because the people who helped me are still alive, and some of them are still in that city, and their safety matters more than the completeness of my story. What I will tell you is this. The network that moved me out of that palace was not built overnight. It had been built over years, quietly, by people who had no official power, no diplomatic standing, no royal title, no billions of dollars in inheritance. People who had nothing except faith and the willingness to use what little they had in service of something larger than themselves. People like Maryam. She had been part of this network for 11 years. 11 years of palace service, of invisible faithfulness, of strategic patience, waiting, praying, watching for the person she believed God had specifically placed her there to help. She told me this with the matter-of-fact simplicity of someone describing a job description rather than an extraordinary act of prolonged sacrifice. "God told me when I first came to this house," she said, folding one of my plain abayas with her quick, practiced hands, "that I was here for one reason. I always believed it was you. I just didn't know when." I looked at this woman, this small, silver-haired Filipino woman in a servant's uniform, who had prayed over my childhood injuries and hidden scripture in her pocket, and built an underground escape route across 11 years of faithful, invisible labour. And I thought, this is what royalty actually looks like. Not marble floors and crystal chandeliers and gold plates. This. She told me what I could take. Almost nothing. One small bag. Personal documents. My passport, which had not yet been confiscated, which Maryam believed my father had delayed confiscating as part of his 3-day calculation, and which represented the single most critical piece of my escape. Some cash she had accumulated for me, her own money, saved across months, converted into the currency I would need. A change of clothes, the New Testament, nothing else. I stood in my walk-in wardrobe, 47 abayas, shoes from every luxury house in Europe, jewellery in glass cases, bags on their own dedicated shelving, and I took one plain abaya and left everything else exactly where it was. I didn't look back at it. I want to be honest with you. I thought I would feel something, leaving all of it. I thought there would be grief, or at least the complicated ambivalence of leaving behind the only physical world you have ever known. But standing in that wardrobe, with my one plain abaya in my hands, looking at the accumulated luxury of a life that had never actually been mine, I felt nothing for any of it, not one thing. I felt the New Testament in my pocket. That was everything I needed. We left at 2 a.m. Not through the main corridors, through the service route. The part of the palace that exists in every great house, but that its owners never see. The narrow, functional corridors that run parallel to the grand marble hallways. The arteries through which the invisible labour of maintaining extravagance flows, unseen and unacknowledged. Plain walls, fluorescent lighting, the smell not of oud and roses, but of industrial cleaning products and cooking, and the honest, ordinary smell of working people. I had lived in this palace for 19 years, and I had never walked these corridors before. It took 11 minutes to reach the service exit on the north side of the compound. Maryam had arranged for one of the kitchen staff, a man named Tariq, not royal, not powerful, a man who drove a delivery vehicle and had a wife and 3 children, and a faith that apparently made him willing to risk all of it. To have his vehicle parked at a specific location at a specific time. He was there. He didn't speak during the drive. He kept his eyes on the road, and he drove steadily and carefully, the way someone drives when they are very frightened, but have decided that their fear is not the most important thing. I watched the palace walls recede through the vehicle's rear window. Those walls that had defined the boundary of my world for 19 years. The walls beyond which I had always believed there was nothing for me. No safety, no belonging, no identity outside the family name and the royal title, and the inherited structure that had owned me since birth. They got smaller, and smaller, and then they were gone. I will not describe the embassy in detail. I will not describe the specific conversations, or the specific people involved in what happened over the following 72 hours, because those people, some of them local believers, some of them expatriate workers, some of them official staff who acted in ways that exceeded their official mandate out of private conscience. Those people have lives that continue in places where my story reaching the wrong ears could do them harm. What I will tell you is what those 72 hours felt like. It felt like the space between 2 worlds. The world I had left, with all its weight and gold and suffocation and familiarity, was behind me, and it had already begun, with the speed and efficiency of power, to respond to my absence. My phone, the primary one, the known one, had been flooding with messages since the first hour. My mother, my sisters, Faisal. Numbers I didn't recognize that were certainly not strangers. The messages ranged across the full spectrum of available pressure. Grief, anger, appeals to family loyalty, religious warnings, legal threats, and one, from a number I didn't recognize, that said only, "Come back before this becomes something that cannot be undone." I turned the phone off. I placed it on the floor of the embassy room. I did not pick it up again. The world ahead of me, the life that Jesus had called me into when he knelt on my palace carpet and said my name, was not yet visible. I couldn't see its shape. I couldn't imagine its texture. I had spent 19 years inside walls, and I had no functional understanding of what life looked like without them. I sat in that embassy room, a plain room, government standard furniture, fluorescent lighting not so different from the service corridors I had walked through the night before. And I held the New Testament in my lap, and I talked to Jesus for hours. I told him I was terrified. I told him I didn't know who I was outside of the title and the palace and the family name. I told him I had no map for the person I was becoming. And he told me, in that way of his, that wordless but more real than words way, something that I have returned to every single day since. You don't need a map. You need me. And you have me. That's enough for today. Tomorrow, that will be enough again. The flight was arranged through channels I still don't fully understand. The underground church network that Maryam had connected me to operated with a quiet, efficient competence that I found both humbling and extraordinary. People who had no resources by the world's standards, and limitless resources by every standard that actually matters. I boarded that flight in a plain abaya with a small bag and a worn New Testament, and a passport that was still valid by the grace of my father's 3-day delay. I had left behind approximately $400 million in assets, properties, accounts, and inheritance. Numbers that I had understood abstractly, amounts attached to my name on documents I had signed in rooms I wasn't allowed to leave, but that had never translated into actual freedom. $400 million. Gone. My title. Gone. My family home. Gone. As the plane lifted from the tarmac, and the city, that sprawling, oil-lit, golden city in the desert that had been my entire world, fell away below the window, I waited for the devastation of that loss to arrive. It didn't come. What came instead was something so unexpected that it took me several minutes to identify it. It was lightness. Physical, literal lightness. The sensation of having set down a weight so familiar that I had stopped perceiving it as weight, only to discover in its absence just how comprehensively it had been crushing me. I pressed my forehead against the cold aircraft window. Below me, the desert spread in every direction, vast, ancient, indifferent, beautiful, lit amber by the last edge of night giving way to dawn. Free indeed. My mother sent one message. One. It arrived on the secondary phone, the hidden one, the one only Maryam had the number for, which told me something about the thoroughness of my father's intelligence that I filed away for private grief later. 4 words. You are dead to me. I read it once. I put the phone face down on my knee. I closed my eyes, and I let myself feel it, fully, without performing composure, without managing the grief into something more acceptable. I let it arrive as what it was, the most devastating 4 words a mother can send to her child. The formal, final severance of the first love of my life. The closing of a door that I had always, on some level, hoped might remain cracked open. I wept for 20 minutes at 35,000 feet over a desert that had once been my home. And then, because this is what grace does, this is the thing about Jesus that I could never have predicted from the outside and cannot adequately describe from the inside. And then, through the tears, came something else. Something that had no right to be present in that moment by any emotional logic I had previously understood. Peace. Not the absence of pain. Not the replacement of grief with something cheerful and convenient. Peace alongside the pain, underneath it. More foundational than it. The peace that Paul, I had just read his words for the first time weeks earlier, in that hidden corner by Torchlight, and the peace that Paul described as surpassing all understanding. Not comprehensible, not earned, not logical, just there. The way Jesus is just there. I lost a palace. I gained a father. I lost billions. I gained eternity. I lost the only world I had ever known, and I found the only world that was ever really real. I want to show you something. Not a palace, not a throne room, not a majlis with 30-foot ceilings and chandeliers from Austria and carpets commissioned from Isfahan over 3 years by craftsmen who never met the people who would walk on them. Just this, a 2-bedroom apartment in a city I will not name, in a country that gave me asylum and a new beginning, and the extraordinary ordinary gift of a life that belongs to me. Plain walls, furniture from a second-hand store. I picked each piece myself, which was the first time in my life I had ever chosen what to put in a room I lived in. A kitchen where I cook my own meals, badly at first, improving slowly, with a freedom in the imperfection that I cannot fully explain to someone who has never had everything done for them against their will. A wooden table where I sit every morning with coffee. I make it myself, just coffee, not Moroccan mint prepared by staff, not saffron-infused preparations served in hand-painted porcelain. Just coffee, in a plain mug, with my Bible open beside it, and the morning light coming through the curtains that I chose and hung myself on a Sunday afternoon while listening to worship music and crying with a happiness so unfamiliar it took me months to stop being surprised by it. I want you to see this apartment and understand. I have never been richer in my life. I know what some of you are thinking. You've been watching for how long now? 45 minutes? You've been inside the palace with me, inside the fear, inside the locked room, inside the Diwan confrontation, inside the escape. And now you're looking at this plain apartment, and some part of you is waiting for me to tell you it was hard, that the adjustment was brutal, that trading a palace for a 2-bedroom apartment broke something in me. Let me be honest with you, because honesty is the only currency I have left, and I intend to spend it lavishly. Yes, it was hard. There were days, weeks, honestly, in those first months, when the dislocation was so complete that I would stand in my small kitchen and my mind would reach, automatically, for things that weren't there. The staff that had always appeared before a need could be fully formed. The resources that had always made every practical obstacle disappear before it had to be confronted. The identity, the title, the name, the family, the position, that had told me who I was in every room I entered, so that I had never had to answer that question for myself. All of it gone. And in its absence, just me. Just Ameerah. No, Your Highness. No royal lineage. No 47 abayas. No gold plates. No private jet on standby. No family network spanning 3 generations of influence. Just a woman, alone, starting from nothing, in a country where no one knew my name. There were nights. I will not pretend otherwise, because pretending otherwise would be a disservice to every person watching this who is in the middle of their own hard thing. There were nights when I sat on my second-hand sofa and I missed my mother with a physical pain that felt like something broken inside my chest. Not the mother who had sent 4 words and gone silent, but the mother I had always wanted her to be. The mother I had, as a child, believed she was, before I understood that she was also trapped, also performing, also a prisoner in a gilded architecture that had consumed her long before it reached me. I grieved that mother, the real one and the imagined one both. And every single time, every single night that the grief arrived like a tide, Jesus was there, not fixing it, not making the pain disappear with a word, not offering the cold comfort of, "It'll get easier," or, "You made the right choice," just there, present. The warmth I first felt in a palace bedroom at 3 a.m, available now in a second-hand furnished apartment at 2 a.m, with equal consistency and equal tenderness. "I miss her," I would tell him. "I know," he would answer in that way of his. "I miss her too. Keep praying for her. She is not beyond me." I found a church in my 3rd week. I want to tell you about this because it matters. Because the church I found was not what I expected, and it gave me something the palace never could. I had imagined, in the abstract way you imagine things you have no direct experience of, that a church would feel like a more democratic version of the formal religious gatherings I had known. Structured, hierarchical, governed by rules and correct procedures and the performance of appropriate devotion. I walked into a Sunday service in a modest building. Nothing like the Palace Mosque. Nothing like any religious space I had ever stood in. And within 4 minutes I was weeping, not from sadness, from the sheer, staggering shock of what I was watching. People were singing, freely, loudly, with their hands raised and their eyes closed, and their faces turned upward, with an expression I had never seen in a religious context in my entire life. Joy. Uncomplicated, unperformed, unearned, freely given joy. A woman next to me, middle-aged, ordinary, nobody from anywhere notable, noticed me crying, and without a word, without asking who I was or where I came from or what I was doing there, she simply put her arm around my shoulders and kept singing. I had been surrounded by 200 people in a palace and been utterly alone. I was surrounded by strangers in a plain building, and I felt, for the first time, with people, in a room, known. Not known as a princess, not known as a conversion story, or a refugee, or an interesting theological case study, known as a person, known as someone who belonged there. Known the way Jesus had known me in that palace room, by name, specifically, personally, with no agenda except love. I stayed for 3 services that Sunday. I didn't want to leave. It has been, I will not say how many years, for reasons of safety that I hope you understand. Some years now since that night in the palace, since the Diwan, since Maryam's 2-knock, 1-knock code at my door, since the plain above the desert and the 4 words from my mother and the lightness at 35,000 feet. My life now looks nothing like anything I could have imagined from inside those 40-acre walls. I study theology. I am learning to teach. I work with an organization, I will not name it, but it exists, and it is extraordinary, that serves people in situations like mine. People from Muslim-majority countries, people from families where faith is weaponized, people who have encountered Jesus and need someone to help them understand what that means and what comes next, and that they are not alone and not crazy and not going to be consumed by what they are walking through. I have, in this work, met people whose stories make mine seem manageable by comparison, people who paid prices I cannot fathom, people who lost children, people who lost everything I lost, and then lost things I didn't lose, and kept walking forward anyway, one day at a time, sustained by the same presence that sustained me on a palace floor at 3 a.m. Their courage has made me braver than I would have been alone. That, I think, is what the church is for. I want to speak now to some specific people. Because this testimony is not just a story. It is not entertainment. It is not content. It is not a 45-minute video that ends when you close the tab. It is an invitation. And I want to make sure the invitation reaches the people it is meant for. If you are watching this from a palace, and I mean that literally, if you are watching this in a room with marble floors and gold fixtures and staff who appear before your needs are fully formed, if you have a title before your name and a fleet of vehicles and a private mosque and a family whose name opens every door, I was you. I wore what you wear. I ate what you eat. I walked those hallways. I sat in those majlis rooms. I performed the correct devotions in the correct direction at the correct times. And my soul was starving. You know what I'm talking about. You feel the hunger I'm describing. You have felt it at dinner tables surrounded by people. You have felt it in the mosque at Fajr when the words come out perfectly and land nowhere. You have felt it late at night in expensive rooms when the performance is finally over and you are alone with yourself and something inside you, something persistent and honest and impossible to silence, keeps asking, is this it? Is this all there is? That hunger is not a malfunction. That hunger is not ingratitude or weakness or spiritual failure. That hunger is your soul recognizing that it was made for something this world cannot give it. Jesus is calling you, right now, in that room, behind those walls, past the guards and the gates and the title and the protocol. He knows your name, not your title, your name. And he is worth everything you would have to give up to say yes to him. I know, because I gave it all up, and I have never, not for one single day, not for one single hour, regretted it. If you are watching this and you are Muslim, please hear me. I am not your enemy. I am not here to mock what you believe, or to perform a conversion for an audience, or to score points for any religion, or any culture, or any side of any argument. I am here because I was you, devout, sincere, genuinely seeking God with everything I had, praying 5 times a day, fasting, giving, submitting. And I found, not through argument, not through someone convincing me intellectually, not through a debate about theology, I found that Jesus is not just a prophet, he is the Son of God. He is God who came here, into this, into the mess and the fear and the locked rooms of our lives. He is the God who does not wait for you to be clean enough, or correct enough, or worthy enough. He comes to you. He came to me on a palace floor at 3 a.m. when I had nothing left to offer and everything to lose. He knelt to where I was. He said my name. He didn't ask me to earn anything. He gave me everything. I am not asking you to abandon your culture, or your family, or everything you have ever known in one dramatic moment. I am asking you to do what I did. Find a quiet place, close the door, and whisper his name. Just his name. And wait. He will answer. I stake everything I am on that truth. If you are watching this and you are hurting, maybe not a palace, maybe a different kind of cage, an addiction that owns you, a relationship that has taken everything, a family that was supposed to protect you and didn't, A version of religion that taught you God was distant and demanding and kept track of your failures. Maybe you have prayed and heard nothing and begun to suspect that the silence is the answer. It isn't. The silence is not God's absence. The silence is the space before He arrives. And He is always, always on His way. You don't have to be clean. You don't have to be worthy. You don't have to have the right words or the right posture or the right theological understanding. You just have to be honest. He can work with honest. He worked with me. I want to pray with you now. Not a performance, not a formula. Just words. Simple, direct, true, that if you mean them, will change everything. The way they changed everything for me. On a floor, in a palace, in the dark, with nothing left. If you are ready, if something in you has been stirred by this story, if the hunger I described is a hunger you recognize, if you have heard, somewhere underneath all the noise of this testimony, something that sounds less like a story about someone else and more like an invitation addressed specifically to you, then say this with me, out loud if you can, in your heart if you must. Jesus, I have been bowing to the wrong things. I have been looking for you in all the wrong places. I have been trying to earn what you have already offered as a gift. Forgive me. I believe you are the Son of God. I believe you came here. For me. Specifically, personally, irreversibly. For me. I believe you died and rose again, and that your resurrection is the hinge on which everything turns. Save me. I am done performing. I am done pretending. I am done with the golden cage. I am yours. Whatever it costs, I am yours. Amen. I lost a palace. I gained a Father who will never leave me and never forsake me and never send me a 4-word message telling me I am dead to Him. I lost billions. I gained an inheritance that cannot be dissolved by royal decree or family tribunal or any power on earth or under it. I lost a kingdom built by human hands on oil and gold and the labor of invisible people. I gained a kingdom that was prepared before the foundation of the world. I lost my name. Your Highness, Princess Ameerah, daughter of Prince Mansour, of the house of... I gained a name that is written in a place no father can erase and no decree can reach. Child of God. That is my title now. It is the only title that was ever worth having. If He found me, in a locked palace room, in a kingdom that forbids His name, in the middle of a life that had no space for Him, He can find you. Wherever you are watching this, whatever room you're in, whatever walls surround you, He knows the way in. He always has. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. John 8:36